We're going to bring in right now Attorney Gerald Griggs with the NAACP. Mr. Griggs, you have been on the front lines of many protests around Metro Atlanta. What is your response to what you have been witnessing here tonight?
Well, my response currently is we really want the individuals to remember the reason why they joined the protest, and that's because of the unlawful loss of life, both in Minneapolis and Louisville, and of course down in Brunswick, Georgia, and then for the victims that have occurred here in Atlanta. So I want them to focus on that, and I would ask them to go home. This is not the way to get your point across by damaging and destroying property. So I think that at this point it's time for them to disperse because, as the mayor said, this is serving no legitimate purpose right now. But I also want to focus people to understand that for 4 hours there was a peaceful protest that moved through the streets of Atlanta to the state capitol and came back to a rally at Centennial Park and then dispersed. This particular group, I don't believe, was fully associated with that group. So we need to make sure we are concerned and focused on the fact that these seem to be two distinct groups.
Now, I know in the protest community, you know a lot of these people, and I think Jeff and I have mentioned that throughout the night, that here it doesn't seem like there is one lead group or one leader that's been over a bullhorn. It really seems like a mashup of people and organizations and groups.
This particular protest was put together on social media, so there's no real lead organization that did this, and that's why I think that it's time for everyone to tell the protesters to go home. And so I think that's the voice of calm that needs to be in this moment. I do thank Atlanta police. I've had conversations with Chief Shields at length tonight about this and their restraint. But I need for the protester to understand at this point there's nothing positive that can happen by continuing to be confrontational with law enforcement. It's time to return to your homes. Your voices have been elevated. Many of your voices were elevated peacefully. Some people decided to damage property, and that's not going to look well on them. But we need to remember this is Atlanta's birthplace of civil rights. Yes, there are many cases that have gone unsolved here in Atlanta, and we understand that. Just that we understand that you want to be in solidarity with Minnesota and Louisville and, of course, Brunswick, but you need to remain peaceful in Atlanta.
Mr. Griggs, Jeff Hullinger here. A question for you about whether these protesters will listen to any of this. The mayor made a passionate, an extraordinary speech tonight. Killer Mike, Reverend King, T.I. was forceful, some really very heartfelt words that were touching, that were moving to hear not only of our city, but the need for change in the country as well. What if they won't listen? What if they simply will not hear your call or other leaders, and this goes on? Is there any way around that?
Well, I think at this point, I don't know if the protesters actually heard the mayor's press conference. And I would actually push back on some of the things she said, because there have been at least 6 cases in Atlanta that have gone unheard, whether that's Jimmy Atchison, Oscar Kane, Kane Rogers, just to name a few. So Atlanta does have this problem, but this is not the way to solve the problem. The way to solve the problem is to apply political pressure, and I think that that's the right message. So again, I commend the police department for having the restraint that they've had. I'm asking, as humbly as I know how, for the protesters to return home and to think about the victims and their families, whether that's in Brunswick, Louisville, or up in Minnesota. We need to abide by the nonviolent principles that were birthed in this city, but we also need to understand that you damage the legacy of the victims by turning this to something else.
All right, Mr. Griggs, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We appreciate that insight and also for bringing up the perspective of those cases that have been in Atlanta. Earlier tonight, we did hear from several people who said that they were on the ground in the name of personal experiences that they've had either themselves or within their families. And so as you think about the three names that we've been calling out, from Breonna Taylor in Louisville to Ahmaud Arbery in Brunswick to George Floyd in Minneapolis, a lot of people are saying they are on the streets tonight in the name of personal experiences that have been brought up, or the re-traumatization that people see from those social media videos that go viral and that just tend to open wounds for people. But I think the message from people like Mr. Griggs and Mayor Bottoms is we've now reached the point of where nothing positive is being accomplished, and we want to get back to that point.
That's correct. And I hope that people can hear that message, and that message of understanding that we've reached this point where you need to protect your own safety and your own freedom by going home. You're not doing George a favor here. You're not doing Breonna a favor. You're not doing Ahmaud a favor. You're not doing Jimmy and Oscar and Veltavius and Jamarian Robinson and the others that are here in Atlanta. You're not doing them a favor by continuing this particular type of protest.
All right, Mr. Griggs, thank you so much for joining us tonight.